Chryseis and Briseis. Both of these women we never see really or hear from. They are just there. They are nothing more than objects for these men to prove that they have great time and therefore clause. And therefore their garos, this idea of the prize. Okay, so you work to get this town, you get this woman, the troops actually award you with this woman. And so for Agamemnon, when he has to return Chryseis, his garos, his time is diminished, and then we got an issue. And that is one of the major reasons why Agamemnon is going to take Achilles' time, his garos, his Briseis. Okay, and this is going to cause all kinds of problems, obviously, when it's done. The next word that we want to talk about that's a Greek word that's important for us is the word Menace. Okay, and this is the very first word of the poem. And when we get to the opening lines of the poem, it's usually translated as either rage or wrath or anger. What's significant about this word is that it's almost always in the Iliad attributable to the gods when they're upset. No other time is it attributable to any human other than Achilles, which is right away, the very first word of this poem is going to seek to try to tell us that the hero Achilles is a different kind of man. He is not a normal kind of mortal man. He is beyond, he is above every other kind of man, both in time as well as kleos, which is why when one of those gets diminished, the other one for sure gets diminished, and therefore Achilles is going to behave the way he behaves. Now, one of the challenges for us, looking back, obviously with hindsight, is that we look at the culture of this poem and we're disgusted by the fact that women are treated in this way. There's no question about that. We will say that out loud. We'll say it many times throughout our study of the Iliad. We are not going to study the Iliad to see it and celebrate it in the way that it was seen and celebrated in its time. But we also need to be objective in our study and recognize this is the culture that we are looking at. And the Greek culture will celebrate this kind of thing. And we'll have to ask, can we understand, within the cultural context, can we understand why it is the case that Achilles is so upset? And therefore, the poem will begin with the word rage, as Robert Fagles will translate it. Finally, I mentioned the word already, in medias res, which is Latin from the great Roman writer Horace. And he said, the greatest poem is the one that we would say today sucks you in, brings you right in. Think about, I'll ask a 3B observation. Think about the last movie that you saw that catches you right in the middle of some kind of action. And from the very beginning, you cannot help but somehow be sucked right into what's going on. Horace said the greatest poems do this, and this is exactly the way that the poem will open. We've been at the walls of Troy for 9 years, going on 10 years, and all of a sudden we are sucked into a situation that will lead to now the rest of the action of the poem. All right, let's turn. We're in lines 1 through 12 just to begin. We'll open now our poem, and we'll look at these opening lines. And again, we'll begin with this word, Menace, rage. And let's just read the first 12 lines and go to work with it. Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous, doom, that costs the Achaeans, another word for the Greeks, countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighter souls, but made their bodies carry on feasts for the dogs and birds, and the will of Zeus was moving towards its end. Begin, muse, when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. What god drove them to fight with such a fury? Apollo, the son of Zeus and Leto. Incensed at the king, he swept a fatal plague through the army. Men were dying, and all because Agamemnon spurred Apollo's priest. Now, just from the opening lines of this poem, watch this. A whole lot is going to be told to us. One, this is going to be a poem about. Put that in your notes, and then let's just list a few things. We're going to be told from the first 12 lines. I just want you to get a sense of how remarkable this, what we call invocation of the muse. To invoke the muse means to ask the muse, the goddess, will you please help me to tell and to remember, this is an oral telling before it's ever written down, this story so that I can do a good job of that. This is going to be a poem about what? Well, right away, it's going to be a poem about Achilles and his rage. Ironic because, of course, he's going to be what we will sometimes refer to as the absent hero. He's always there behind the action, but for most of the poem, we never see him. We have no idea what he's doing other than he's in his tent with Patroclus pouting because he lost his team, he lost his Scooby Snacks, he lost his brassiers. We're told that this is a poem about Peleus. Achilles' daddy is mentioned right away. Put it in your notes, and you're going to see this, and it's a remarkable thing. It's going to be a poem about fathers and sons, mothers and sons, fathers and daughters, mothers and daughters. It's going to be a story that's generational to some degree. In this poem, we're constantly going to be reminded that the heroes come from somewhere. All right? And throughout the poem, Achilles is going to be reminded by any number of people who his father was, what Peleus expects from him, etc., right? Third, we're going to see and play right away, because we're going to recognize this is a poem about the blame game. That is to say, who's responsible for all of the terrible stuff that happens? Okay? The question, of course, in its philosophic instantiation is what we call the theodicy question. How can you explain the fact that a powerful, all-powerful, and yet all-loving deity allows there to be pain and suffering in the world? This is, of course, going to be the question when we study Milton's Paradise Lost. If you want to jump to those, my lectures are available for you either in the Harvard Classics folder, and you can watch my lectures on Paradise Lost, and Milton is playing the exact same game. The question here is, who's to blame? And the answer for us will be, well, it's hard to answer. Obviously, we can blame Helen, and we can blame Paris, if we want to talk about those pre-Iliad stories. Here, we can blame Achilles and his rage, obviously the fight with Agamemnon. Here, notice, we've also got the will of Zeus that's mentioned, as well as the god Apollo. Are the gods responsible for all the terrible things that happen? This is the question that will be resurrected in the opening lines, and we're going to play that game all the way through, right? The question, as well, of the will of Zeus. We'll get to it. It's going to be a poem about the house of death, notice mentioned. That is to say, if I had to reduce this poem down to kind of a little phrase to two words, it would be, let's die. This is going to be a poem about death. In the same way that when I lecture to you the Odyssey, I'll say that you can reduce that one down to let's go. And when we look at those two poems, we're going to recognize that the Iliad, its narrative kind of structure is a very linear one, and it's very direct and to the point, very Achillean, we might even say, as opposed to an Odyssean type of poem that the Odyssey is, that's far more cyclical, and let's go gives all kinds of ideas of implications of journeying out. In the end, we know where everybody's headed in this poem. And while Achilles doesn't die in this poem, we understand that the implication of this poem is standing in the shadows all the time is going to be the death of Achilles. It's coming, and he knows that it's coming, and we know that he knows that it's coming. Okay? Well, the next thing we can say this is a poem about, we mentioned it already, is this will of Zeus. By the way, just to jump back to this house of death for one more second, we know about the Greeks' view of the underworld when we hit the Odyssey, because Odysseus takes a journey down there to meet Tiresias, and he sees a lot of people down in the underworld. The Greeks had an understanding that when you died, everyone has a body and a soul, a psyche. And when you die, your body goes back into the ground, but your psyche, your soul, it goes down into Hades. You mustn't think of it as hell the way Dante will portray hell, for example, in his Divine Comedy, Inferno, part 1 of Divine Comedy. Rather, everybody goes down into the underworld, Hades. In other words, this is a poem that reminds every one of its listeners and then later readers that you're here, but not for long. Inevitably, death is coming, and it's a function of how you live your life. What's the great line from the Gladiator film? What we do in life echoes in eternity. That is a line that Achilles would understand in terms of kleos, again, that notion of glory, okay? Some have pointed out then that the will of Zeus, this is a poem about the will of Zeus, is really a question about how much power does Zeus even have as it relates to fate and the question of determinism. Okay, so philosophically, we're going to play that game here in the opening lines as well. To what degree can Zeus keep what's got to happen from happening? For example, Greek audiences understood right away when they heard this story recited, and then later when they read it, they understood that the city of Troy is going to fall. It's got to fall. It is fated to fall. So why go to Zeus and ask him to try and alter or change? Well, he can alter in the interim. So for example, Thetis will in fact go to Zeus and say, please help us out. And Zeus will say, okay, I'll help you out. But that doesn't mean, just because a lot of Greeks are going to die, that doesn't mean, however, that Troy isn't going to fall. To what degree then does Zeus have really any kind of true power? It's a fascinating question. Or how about this one? Because the gods are immortal, they have no fear of dying. Humans, on the other hand, are mortal and they know it. And therefore they do have a fear of dying. And to that degree, think of it, only humans then can actually have courage to stand in the face of death and face it, knowing full well that today might be the day I am fated to die. We will play this game with Patroclus and his death. We will see it with Scamander. We'll see it with a whole lot of different kinds of heroes. Obviously, the most famous will be the death of Hector himself, right? Finally, well, this is going to be a poem about fighting and about violence. I mean, just think of it. In the Iliad, we will have a lot of different kinds of violence. Verbal violence, obviously physical violence, psychological or emotional violence. Clearly, we're going to have sexual violence. I mean, several times. You're going to be offended. I'm telling you in advance, and I hope that you are offended by some of the lines early on in the Iliad, where the promise to all of the Greek men is that you each will get at least one Trojan wife that you will get to take from the city and do with her sexually whatever you want. Whoa! As a matter of fact, Agamemnon will tell Chryseis' dad when he comes, I'm going to take your daughter back home and I'm going to keep her in my bed. So in other words, sexual violence is clearly a part as well of this text. Theological violence, we're going to have the gods fighting against each other. That's always a surprise to a lot of readers. They cannot believe, because these gods are, as we say in the Hamilton lectures, anthropomorphic, gods in the form of humans. How truly human the gods are, the way they whine, the way they fight, the way they slap around and hit on each other, the way they threaten each other. It's juvenile, which is why in our lectures on Plato's Republic, you'll remember, Socrates went so far as to say, this is not gods to believe in. This is gods to laugh at and jeer at, but not gods to believe in, surely not. You'll remember that Socrates, of course, is jacked in 399 BCE for what? Atheism, saying that the gods are not legit, right? It's, of course, there's all kinds of fighting or struggling that we would call philosophic, and, of course, cultural. And I've just listed a few of the potential fights. I mean, you can start that list and you'll make a whole bunch of them, okay? Men fighting against animals, animals and men fighting against natural forces. I mean, it's all kinds of different types of struggle or violence going on here. Check this out. That's only the first 12 lines. And if I wanted to, I could, and scholars have spent even more time. But this is, I'm going to argue, what makes great works of literature classics. Because when we pick them up and we read them, we cannot help but be again challenged by what it is that we're looking at. Let's go to work now. Our first part of book number 1, lines 1 through 12, the invocation of the Muse. We next turn to lines 13 through 355, and this is the Agamemnon-Achilles fight. That's how you can put it in your notes. Let's go to work with it now and follow it through. And I'm going to jump into different parts now of the Iliad itself, and I hope that you will follow along. First of all, of course, we're wanting our daughter back for Chryseis, right? And so he comes to Agamemnon and he says, please give me my daughter Chryseis back. And the answer that Agamemnon gives, roughly around line 33 or so, is to say, the girl, talking about Chryseis, I wouldn't give up the girl long before that old age will overtake her in my house in Argos, far from her fatherland, slaving back and forth at the loom, forced to share my bed. Now, go, don't tempt my wrath. You may depart alive. Well, this poor treatment, of course, of Chryseis' father leads Chryseis to pray to the god Apollo. Please do something about this. And Apollo is very easily pleased. Apollo is the god not only of healing, but he's also the god of plague. Very easily, he will find himself then knocking off a good number of the warriors. And this will lead to, at line 53, that the arrows clanged at his back as the god quaked with rage. This is the same word at the very beginning of the poem. The god himself on the march, and down he came like night, we're told, and he begins to kill over and over again. For 9 days we have this plague. And finally Achilles can take no more of it. And he, kind of circumventing the authority of Agamemnon, right? You get the sense that Agamemnon knows why all these men are dying. He just doesn't care. He wants the girl, and so he doesn't care. And it's Achilles who will call this meeting. And it's Achilles who will say, basically, we either do one or two things. We either pack up and leave this place because it's cursed, or we're going to ask our seer, Calchas, if Calchas has any idea what's going on. Calchas, of course, is concerned because he knows this is all about Agamemnon. I don't want to get into this because Agamemnon will have me killed. And Achilles basically tells him, don't worry about it, I've got your back, I'll take care of you, etc., etc. And it will be then that Calchas will say that the real problem here is that we've got to give the girl back, right? And then that's it, right? So, for example, I'm with you now at line 108 or so. Not even if you mean Agamemnon here, Achilles says. He says to Calchas, hey, you got to have courage here. Not even if you mean Agamemnon here, who now claims to be by far the best of the Achaeans. And for the first time, we're going to see Achilles is kind of giving a little bit of a dig to Agamemnon. We're already beginning to see that Agamemnon and Achilles, they don't get on very well together. We're certainly going to see that one here in a second. Okay. It will then be said out loud in front of all the Greek troops, Agamemnon, your treatment of Chryseis has got to stop. It's got to change. You got to give the girl back. This is the problem. All of our men are dying. We're told that Chalcis will declare this, and he sits down. I'm at line roughly 119. But among them rose the fighting son of Atreus, Agamemnon, lord of the far-flung kingdoms, Agamemnon. Furious, his dark heart filled to the brim, blazing with anger, now his eyes like searing fire. With a sudden killing look, he wheeled on Calchas first. Prophets or seers, they always get, they get the worst end of it. Seer of misery, he says. Never a word that works to my advantage. Always misery warms your heart, your prophecies. Never a word of prophet said or brought to pass. Now, again, you divine God's will for the armies. Brood it about as fact why the deadly archer multiplies our pains. Because I refuse that glittering, there's the word prize, Garros, right? For the young girl, Chryseis. Indeed, I prefer her by far, the girl herself. I want her mine in my own house. Look what he says about Chryseis. I rank her higher than Clytemnestra, my wedded wife. She's nothing less in build or breeding and mind or works of hand, but I am willing to give her back, even so, if that is best for all. So here for a moment, Agamemnon really is on the horn of a nasty dilemma. On the one hand, he wants the girl. On the other hand, his desire for the girl is leading to large numbers of Greeks dying of plague. And so he says, all right, I'm willing to give her back, even so, if that is best for all. What I really want is to keep my people safe, not seeing them dying. We'll have to debate whether this is true, if that's what he really wants or not. But fetch me another prize. That is to say, Time. My Time has been reduced. If I give up Chryseis, I need another girl. I need something to replace my lost Time, or I will lose in Kleos. Okay? And straight off, too, else I alone of the Argives go without my honor. That would be a disgrace. You're all witnesses. Look, my prize is snatched away. Now, of course, the irony will be that Achilles will ultimately speak here and maybe seal his own fate and the fate of a good number of the Greek men sitting there, back to the opening lines of the poem, right? But the swift runner, Achilles, answered him at once. Just how, Agamemnon, great field marshal, most grasping man alive, how can the generous Argives give you prizes now? I know of no troves of treasure, piled, laying idle anywhere. Whatever we dragged from towns we plundered, all been portioned out. But collected, call it back from the rank and file, that would be the disgrace. So, return the girl to the god, at least for now. We Achaeans will pay you back 3 or 4 times over, if Zeus will grant us the gift somehow, someday, to raise Troy's massive ramparts to the ground. So Achilles says, hey, it's not like, dude, it's not like we have a bunch of, treasure sitting around that nobody wants or nobody possesses. In other words, Achilles says, A, give the girl back. B, we got no treasure to give you now, but when we conquer Troy, we will give you a lot of Time. We'll give you a lot of Garros. We'll give you a lot of prizes. We'll give you Scooby snacks, if you will. But King Agamemnon countered, not so quickly, brave as you are, godlike Achilles, trying to cheat me. And again, it's always been pointed out by readers of this poem, especially postmodern readers, how unbelievably juvenile these two men become in their treatment of each other and in their inability to resolve conflict without thinking about just themselves. It's quite remarkable. Notice Agamemnon, I'm not going to let you cheat me. Oh no, you won't get past me. Take me in that way? What do you want? To cling to your own prize while I sit calmly by empty-handed here? Is that why you order me to give her back? No. If our generous Argives will give me a prize, a match for my desires equal to what I've lost, well and good. But if they give me nothing, I will take a prize myself. Your own, Briseis, or Ajax or Odysseus' prize. By the way, the first mention of both Ajax and Odysseus, although just by name, right? I'll commandeer her myself and let that man I go to visit choke with rage. Enough. We'll deal with all this later in due time. Now, come. We haul a black ship down to the bright sea, gather a decent number of oarsmen along her locks, put aboard a sacrifice in Chryseis herself in all her beauty. We embark her too. Let one of the leading captains take command. Trusty Odysseus, for example, he says. And he says, you, Achilles, you, the most violent man alive, so you can perform the rites for us and calm the god yourself. Well, Achilles is having none of this. He sees where this is going. He knows that, oh, okay, so this is what you think you're going to do to me. You're going to humiliate me in front of all these guys? Now we got two guys who obviously have egos that are wounded, and he will respond. A dark glance, and the headstrong runner answered him in kind. Shameless. Armored in shamelessness, always shrewd with greed. How could any Argive soldier obey your orders gladly and freely, do your sailing for you, or fight your enemies full force? Not I, no. It wasn't Trojan spearmen who brought me here to fight. The Trojans never did me damage, nor in the least. They never stole my cattle or my horses. Never in Pythia, where the rich soil breeds strong men, did they lay waste my crops. How could they? Look at the endless miles that lie between us. It's an amazing metaphorical line. Look at the endless miles that lie between us. Shadowy mountain ranges, seas that surge and thunder. No, you colossal, shameless. We all followed you to please you, to fight for you, to win you honor back from the Trojans. Menelaus and you dog face, the insults now are coming. What do you care? Nothing.